The Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Glory to you, O Lord. From that time on, after Peter confessed that Jesus was the Messiah, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid it, Lord. This must never happen to you. But Jesus turned and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. Then Jesus told his disciples, If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? For the Son of Man is to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay everyone for what has been done. Truly, I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. You've heard the saying, one person's trash is another person's treasure. It's the rallying cry of thrift store connoisseurs and garage sale aficionados. I've been to enough of them to know. And if that's true, then the opposite must also be true. One person's treasure is another person's trash. I've sorted through enough boxes of my childhood artwork in the keepsake section of my mom's attic to know that as well. One person's treasure is another person's trash. Or to put it in the language of our gospel text, one person's rock is another person's stumbling block. In other words, what one person might hold dear might be the very same thing that another person finds to get in the way. Just last week, only a few verses before today's story, Peter is named as the rock for his bold confession of faith. Blessed, he's called. And now he's called out by Jesus as a stumbling block for trying to rebuke him. So which is it? Is Peter a rock or a stumbling block? Let's take a step back for a moment and maybe consider this from Peter's perspective. By this point, the disciples have been together with Jesus for quite some time. They've traveled together, they've witnessed healings and miracles, heard sermons and teachings and debates with religious authorities. They've encountered people of all kinds, from the temple courts to the very margins of society. For a group of people that don't have much of a place in the outside world, they seem to click together as Jesus' disciples. A group of misfits and nobodies by the world's standards have a sense of belonging with each other. This community, or this island of misfit disciples, has been through a lot together. And then Jesus makes this startling announcement, a foreshadowing of his own suffering and death. And Peter, perhaps understandably, is quick to rush to Jesus' defense. This must never happen to you. It can't. It won't. I won't let it. Peter knows that this relationship that he has with Jesus is so precious and so dear that he'll do anything he can to keep it that way. Because for once he's found a sense of belonging and community, and he's not about to let that slip away without a fight. For Peter, Jesus was his rock, the relationship that he clung to. And now Jesus is about to take that all away, or so it seems. So Peter reacts and he blurts out the first thing that comes to his mind, an emotional heat of the moment response. And Jesus' reply is a little harsh, maybe. Jesus calls Peter a stumbling block, something that gets in the way, a tripping hazard, an impediment to something else. One person's rock is another person's stumbling block. Stumbling blocks get in the way and cause us to trip, maybe even cause injury. Intentionally or not, I think the church has been guilty of setting up its own stumbling blocks when the long-held beliefs or customs of the in crowd are the very same things that cause others on the outside to trip or to not feel welcomed or fully included. These stumbling blocks are the things that get in the way of others' experience of the fullness of who God is and the fullness of the abundant life that God promises for all. Maybe it's exclusively masculine language for God, even though the ruach, or spirits, in the Old Testament is in fact a feminine noun in the Hebrew. Or maybe it's our depictions of a white Jesus, as though he were from Minneapolis and not the Middle East. But when those stumbling blocks are removed, when those barriers are lifted, our understanding of who God is and how God longs to be in relationship with us only expands and becomes richer and more life-giving. So what if Jesus' response to Peter is not so much a rebuke or an insult, but actually an invitation? What if Jesus is inviting Peter to upend the stumbling block and to imagine an even wider and more meaningful community, even more meaningful than the one he's already come to be a part of? Jesus is challenging Peter to move beyond his comfort zone and inviting him to follow the path of being a disciple that leads to even deeper and wider community. And yes, it's a path that leads to the cross. And the cross shows us where God is. The cross shows us a God who is present in the midst of suffering, whose love extends to the very margins of society. The cross stands in the midst of Kenosha, Wisconsin, amid protesters denouncing racism and crying out for justice. The cross stands wherever people are hurting and unable to breathe under the weight of systems that devalue their very lives and existence. The cross stands in places choked by death as a witness to the God who is with us. The cross is God's pronouncement that the lives of our siblings of color matter. The path of being the kind of disciple that Jesus calls us to be, the path toward the cross and solidarity with those who are hurting, is not an easy path. It calls us out of our comfort zones. It might even mean giving up the rocks or the treasures that we hold dear. But it also means gaining so much more. A world where life, not death, gets the final word. A world where all people might experience the kind of radical belonging and community that God yearns for us to be a part of. A world that overturns every last stumbling block to make way for God's extravagant love to fill every last corner.